You were born in Europe, a long, long time ago, an age when people believed bathing could kill you, cold food was medicine, and owning a horse automatically made you somebody important. You were born into a noble family, and that sounds wonderful. Until you learned the catch. There was already an older brother. He was the one who'd inherit everything, the land, the money, the castle, even the warm bedroom. You were just the second son, and in this world, that meant exactly one thing. You were going to become a knight, whether you liked it or not. As a baby, everyone looked down at you with that strange little smile and said, "Oh, this one's going to be a knight one day. What an honor!" And you just stared back at them from your crib, thinking, what even is a knight? Do they get candy? Here's the truth nobody bothered to tell you. The knight of your era wasn't the storybook hero. He was a man who wrapped himself in iron all day, got beaten black and blue on a regular basis, woke up an hour before sunrise, went to sleep 2 hours after moonrise, and smelled absolutely terrible all week long. But of course, nobody tells a toddler that. Adults love lying to children. Your first years flew by. You tried to walk, then fell. You tried to talk, and out came gibberish that made the servants laugh. But one thing was painfully obvious. You had zero natural talent for knighthood. You were terrified of the chickens in the yard. You screamed at spiders. You cried if you so much as tripped. And yet everyone kept saying with total confidence, he'll grow up to be a mighty knight. Your father was a stern, serious nobleman. He'd look at you, shake his head and say, "This boy will carry a sword one day." Then at age 5, everything changed. Your father burst into your room early one morning and woke you, gently, or so you thought. In reality, he was yanking the blanket off you and saying, "Get up! Today your life as a knight begins." You blinked awake, wiped the drool from your chin and mumbled, "Are we having candy?" Your father stared at you for a long moment, then simply said, "No." And so began training lesson number 1. Stop crying for no reason. You failed spectacularly. But the real training wasn't happening at home yet. At age 7 came the day you'd been dreading without even knowing why. A massive knight arrived, Lord Gregor, a man so huge his beard could double as a pillow, with a voice like an iron door slamming shut. He told your father, "I'm taking the boy today." You stood behind your mother, trembling, and asked in a tiny voice, "Where are we going? Are we going on a trip?" The knight let out a booming laugh that sent birds scattering. A trip? Oh yes, a very, very long trip. About 10 years. Your mother cupped your face in her hands and began to cry. You didn't understand any of it. Up until that moment, you'd lived in a big house, slept in a warm bed, eaten good bread, and played in the yard. Today, all of that ended. The knight mounted his horse, sat you behind him, and you swear your spine cracked from the sheer force of it. You waved goodbye to your mother and to your older brother, who, by the way, was smiling a little too happily because you were leaving, and he was finally getting rid of you. The journey to the new castle began. The road stretched on forever, the horse charged forward relentlessly, and your head kept slamming into the knight's back with every step. Somewhere along the way, you worked up the courage to ask, "Sir, can I go back for my mother? I forgot my toy." He looked at you dead serious and said, "From now on, your toy is a sword." You asked, "Is the sword soft?" He said, "No." You arrived at the castle at sunset, and the moment you stepped inside, you realized your entire beautiful old life had just been a short vacation. The halls were freezing. The wind howled between the stones. Soldiers shouted everywhere. The smell of the stables hit your nose immediately. A massive man pointed and said, "This is where you sleep." You looked down and found a tiny mattress on the floor with 5 rats sitting beside it, staring at you. "Is this my room?" you asked, terrified. "Yes," the man said. "And the rats?" "Your neighbors," he replied calmly. Your first day began as a page, a title that sounds charming, but really just means unpaid child servant. Your duties were endless: carry water, fetch the sword, clean the boots, wipe the tables, muck out the stables. After a full day of scrubbing, a hulking knight would show up and say, "Now polish the saddle too." You'd protest, "But I just finished." He'd bark back, "Good job, now polish another one." That's how you learned an important lesson about castle life. When someone says "good job," what they actually mean is, "there's more." At night, you'd try to sleep, but the rats kept fighting beside you. One dragged a piece of bread straight out of your bag. You whispered, "That's my dinner." The rat looked at you without the slightest guilt, and ate it anyway. The days dragged on, and every single one taught you something new. Life wasn't easy. The people here were tough. The food was hard enough to double as a weapon. And the horse hated you for no discernible reason. But despite it all, you'd sometimes smile, especially when a kind knight passed by and said, "Well done, boy." Just 2 small words, but somehow they gave you enough strength to survive an entire day. By the time those years came to a close, you had changed. You'd grown a little taller, a little stronger, and you'd gotten used to the cold, the hunger, the shouting. And somewhere deep inside you, something new was quietly taking shape. Something small, but essential to becoming a real knight. The years crawled forward. Your body began to stretch out, your voice started to crack, and you started feeling something entirely new: pain. One morning, at 14 years old, you woke up and groaned, "Ugh, my back hurts, my leg hurts, my arm hurts, even my ear hurts." Why? The knight in charge of you just laughed. "Good, that means you're growing. Pain is a good sign." You looked at him and asked, "So what's the bad sign?" He answered flatly, "Dying." And so began the next chapter. You became a squire, another title that sounds noble, but really just means a slightly bigger servant. Same old chores, just now with more shouting, more work, more bruises, and of course, more knights barking at you to hurry up, even when you were already moving at the speed of light. At this age, you were assigned to a full knight of your own, a massive man named Sir Albert, sporting a mustache so long, it could probably kill you if he turned his head too fast. He loved yelling, a lot, but in his own strange way, he loved you too. The way a father loves his son. On your first day with him, he said, "You're my squire now, you're my right hand." You asked, "So what do I do?" He answered with total confidence, "Everything." And true to his word, you were soon buried in work, cleaning the stables, polishing the armor, washing the sword, helping him suit up, carrying his bag, his food, his helmet, and honestly, if he'd let you, you'd have carried the man himself. You trailed behind him like a shadow, exhausted, while he strode ahead with total confidence and pride, and you stumbled behind, tripping over your own feet. Then came the real training. It was brutal, as if it had been custom designed, purely to make you suffer. Sword drills, shield drills, horseback drills, screaming while fighting drills, and falling without crying drills, which turned out to be the hardest of them all. You fell so often that Sir Albert eventually told you, "You don't need falling practice anymore, you're already a professional." There was one special exercise called carrying the sword through the mud. They'd throw you into a muddy pit, and you had to climb out while still gripping your sword. Every time you tried to stand, you'd slip and fall right back in. And after the mud came the horse training. The horse they gave you was named Dawnfang, and it walked one step and then kicked you. You'd smile at it, and it would kick you again. You lived in fear of even looking at it, because it might kick you just for that. Once you tried to mount it, and it flat out refused. "Please," you begged, "just this once." It stared back at you with eyes that clearly said no. Then it shook its head and threw you straight to the ground. Still, you trained every single day. Your strength grew week by week, your skill grew month by month. And even though the training was painful, there were small moments that made it all worth the exhaustion. Like the time you were polishing Sir Albert's armor and he asked, "You want to become a knight like me one day?" You answered confidently, "Yes." He patted your shoulder and said, "Then hold on, the road is long." It was the first time he'd ever said something kind to you without shouting it. When he left the room, you smiled to yourself. It felt good. As the years passed, you started taking part in small skirmishes, not massive battles, just clashes with a village or bandits trying to rob a caravan. But to you, these felt like the end of the world. The first time you entered a fight, your hands shook, your heart pounded, and you swore your knees would buckle on their own. Sir Albert told you, "Don't be afraid." You replied, "I'm not afraid. My body's just doing this on its own." You charged into the battle. People screamed. Horses whinnied, the air filled with dust. You swung your sword left and right. Half your swings hit nothing but air, the other half hit the ground. But in the end, you survived. And when you returned to the castle, exhausted beyond belief, you were happy. Happy simply because you weren't dead. That night, lying in your simple bed, you felt something new. You no longer felt like a frightened child. You felt like you'd taken one small step closer to becoming a real knight. You weren't the strongest. You weren't the fastest. You weren't even the smartest. But you had something more important, a heart that refused to give up. And so the years of fear came to an end. Day by day, a massive moment was approaching. The day that would change your entire life. The day you would finally become a knight. You were nearing 21, and everyone in the castle told you the same thing. Soon you'll be a knight. You heard it so often, yet you still couldn't picture what that day would actually look like. You felt fear and joy at exactly the same time. The day before your knighting ceremony, Sir Albert came to you holding a small pouch and said, "Tomorrow is important. You must fast tonight." You asked, "Why? Religious reasons?" He said, "No, the kitchen staff forgot to cook." That night, you sat alone in the cold chapel. The candles burned slowly. The air was freezing. The darkness pressed against your shoulders. You trembled, not just from the cold, but from the thoughts racing through your mind. Am I ready? Will I die quickly? Will I fall off my horse in front of everyone? Will people laugh at me? But suddenly, you remembered every single year that had led to this moment. Every scream, every drill, every fall into the mud, every kick from that horse. You remembered that you had endured all of it and never once ran away. So you told yourself, "I am not weak. I made it this far. I will go further." In the morning, the priest arrived and performed the knighting rites, placing his hand on your shoulder. Then the Lord approached and laid the sword across your shoulders as you knelt, your back aching, but you were smiling. The Lord said in a deep voice, "From this day forward, you are a knight." You felt like the entire world was pushing you forward. As you stood, Sir Albert shouted from behind you, "Don't you dare fall. That would be shameful." Your knees nearly betrayed you, but you held firm. An hour later, they brought you your armor. It was heavier than you'd expected. The first time you tried to lift it, you asked, "Is this made of iron or an entire mountain?" But inside that heavy iron shell, you felt something powerful. You felt ready for anything. Not even a full day passed before a messenger came running, shouting that an attack was closing in near the border. That meant only one thing. Your very first battle as a knight was starting today. You hadn't even gotten used to your armor yet, or your new title, Sir, or the unfamiliar weight on your shoulders. But you climbed onto your horse. Or rather, you attempted to. You struggled badly, and the moment you finally sat down, the horse practically groaned, "Have mercy." You patted its neck and said, "If I die today, you're going down with me." The horse looked back at you with an expression that clearly said, "I'll throw you off first." The small army marched toward the battlefield. The soldiers walked in silence. The air was cold, the sky grey. You could hear their armor clanking, their breathing, and your own heart hammering against your chest. Sir Albert rode up beside you and said, "Your first battle is always terrifying." You asked, "Does the fear ever go away as you get older?" He tightened his horse's reins and said, "No, but you'll learn to fight through it anyway." You nodded and hoped desperately that he was right. When you arrived, the ground was thick with mud and water. The enemy stood on the other side, screaming, slamming their spears against their shields. And all you could think was, "I want to go home. I want my bed. I want warm bread." But there was no road back now. You heard the army commander scream, "Ready yourselves!" The horses charged, and the sound of their hooves was like thunder. You gripped your sword so tightly, your knuckles turned white. And suddenly you were swept straight into the chaos, screaming, clashing blades, the crash of iron on iron, mud flying into your face. You felt like the entire world was shaking around you. You struck your sword against the shield of a man in front of you, and the impact rebounded so hard, it made you cry out. But the man still went down, though probably more out of fear than from the strength of your swing. Sir Albert rode past you shouting, "Hit harder!" You yelled back, "I'm trying!" He shot back, "Don't try! Do it!" So you struck again, and this time you actually landed a real blow on someone. The feeling was strange, terrifying, and yet it gave you a strange kind of courage. Then came a moment you never saw coming. A massive man attacked you, raising his sword high above his head. You were certain this was the end. You threw your shield up just in time, and his sword crashed down onto it with brutal force. You screamed in pain, but shoved him back with your foot and struck his leg. He stumbled and fell. You couldn't believe you'd actually done it. "I'm alive, I'm alive," you kept telling yourself. Then someone shouted, "Watch out!" You spun around, just as another man was lunging at you. And at the very last second, Sir Albert appeared and shoved him away. Breathless, he told you, "Don't look around so much. This isn't a stage performance." You said, "I was celebrating that I didn't die." He shouted back, "Celebrate after the fighting's over." Long minutes passed that felt like hours. Eventually, the enemy began to flee, running off into the distance, and the air was thick with dust and screaming. You could barely breathe. Your hands were shaking. Your face was caked in mud and sweat. But the important thing was, you were alive. The army sat down to rest. You dropped to the ground, pulled off your helmet, and stared up at the sky. In a weak voice, you said, "I survived." Sir Albert sat beside you and said, "You did what you needed to do. You didn't run. You didn't fall off the horse. That's a real achievement." You said, "I was pretty close to falling." He replied, "I won't tell anyone." Then he smiled. For the first time in years. But surviving didn't mean your life as a knight was over. Far from it. The days ahead were full of more battles and new pains. You once believed knighthood meant glory and heroism, but slowly you began to see its true face. Endless exhaustion, fear that never fully faded. And as you moved into your 20s, every battle taught you something. Every fall made you stronger, and every cold night reminded you that the road wasn't over yet. You were a knight now. But the real knight hadn't been born yet. You'd learn that in all the years still to come. The years passed heavier and faster. You reached your mid-30s, and you started to feel your body wasn't what it used to be. Your arms and back ached constantly. Standing up felt like moving an old wooden plank. The horse you'd once ridden as a young man had been replaced with a mule named Gerald, who walked around like he was seeing ghosts everywhere. Your armor no longer fit the way it used to. But you were still a knight. By now the battles weren't just bigger, they were constant. A rebellion here, a crusade there. Some duke's son insulted the church's chicken. They tell you you're fighting for salvation. The Lord tells you you're fighting for glory. But you know the real truth. You're fighting so you don't have to pay more taxes. Life was harsh, and every day hurt a little more than the one before. But there were still small moments that made it bearable. Like when a passing farmer would smile and say, "What a night." Despite everything, the battles grew harsher, but you'd learned how to protect yourself, how to avoid death for as long as possible. Then, in one small, insignificant skirmish, a young farmhand fired an arrow from close range, and it struck your thigh. You didn't die instantly. You lingered, fighting fever and hallucinations. In those moments, you sat on the ground and looked around, the horse panting beside you, the wound burning, the sky as grey as it was every morning. The years passed, and you aged quickly. By your 50s, as a knight, you felt like you'd lived 100 years and more. Every morning was a struggle to rise. Your teeth were gone. Your hearing depended entirely on which way the wind was blowing. Your whole body ached. A traveling bard would ask you for stories of your heroic battles, and you'd lie without a hint of shame. About fights you never fought, crediting yourself with victories that never happened. The peasants saw you as a legend. You knew the miserable truth, but at least up until that moment, you were still alive. And then, finally, came the day with no battle, no threat, no glory in sight. You sat in your bed, your old wound still aching, staring up at the clouds, thinking, was any of it worth it? All the pain, all the kicks, all the mud, all the screaming? Did it mean anything? You smiled to yourself, sadly, and maybe a little foolishly. Then you closed your eyes. You didn't die in battle. You didn't die with the honor the storybooks promise. Your life as a knight simply ended and worn out, remembering every horse, every drop of blood, every patch of mud, every fight, every failure. But you had lived. Even if the ending was painfully ordinary, they buried you in the churchyard, beside the fence, beneath a plain old stone. No statue, no poem, just a rusted helmet that still catches the sunlight now and then. As for the village bard, he kept right on singing about your legendary deeds, even claiming you once slew a dragon, though you never did. But deep down, you knew the truth. You knew your life had been a long journey. Funny, sad, full of pain and joy, battles and failures, laughter and tears. You were a real knight in spite of everything. And that was the ending. The real ending. Painful and darkly funny all at once. For a man who lived his life exactly as it was, with every ache and every small moment that made it worth living.